All right. Well, we are talking canvassing today. This is like, Chris, we had you on another webinar of ours earlier this year and last year talking about home shows and both with you and Megan Beatty, like you guys are always like just amazing resources to talk to, like when calls to call
Appreciate
center,
that.
home shows. And we've talked so many times just off here of talking about we should do something on canvassing and we're actually getting to that. So I'm excited to dive into this with you here today. So we're going to talk about canvassing, best practices, and just to maximize success in canvassing across the board. So super excited to dive in. So my first question, actually, I'll let you introduce yourself first, Chris, because not everyone knows who you are. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in the industry.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on again. It's always a pleasure. I ran canvas departments for many years on Long Island and in Brooklyn, and I had as many as 50 canvassers working for me on my team. I had layers of management under me in my department. I had 4 managers at one point that worked under me. I had a full-time assistant, and at times it still didn't seem like it was enough. And I started that canvas department. It was basically myself and one van. We grew it over the years to, where we grossed over $10 million a year in canvas sales. And we became a big part of like the calendar. We were filling the calendar and keeping sales reps in houses. And I learned from the best in the business. I worked with a lot of people know the Yohos. I worked with them when I was with Renewal. And when I left Renewal, I went to work full-time with my buddy, Tony Hoty, who I'm still with today, who, the thing I loved about Tony, when Tony would come out to Long Island, the first thing we would do is knock doors together. It wasn't so much theory in the classroom as much as let's get out and generate some leads, and my friend Megan and also Kyle Powers, who's worked with Tony Hoty, we always talk about the dumb tax, right? As a canvas manager, I paid the dumb tax so many times, because I made mistakes. And one of the things I think we're able to help people with is kind of avoiding some of those, early issues when you get into canvas and bad things that can happen that will cost you money, and a lot of heartache. So I love talking about canvas. And one last thing I'll say is something I've noticed is a lot of companies got away from canvas during COVID. Suddenly, over the last year or so, a lot more canvas requests. Canvas is, some companies never stop, but across the country, it seems like canvas is making a big comeback right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. I mean, Ryan in the chat here said 6.5 million year to date from canvas. That's wow. Yeah, that's a significant revenue bump there. And yeah, I've kind of heard the same thing as well. And is that, companies who have never done canvassing are starting canvassing departments now. And those who really had to shut down via COVID and their market have really rebounded and tried to get things off the ground. But honestly, getting something off the ground it can be just as hard as starting from new and from scratch again, because the rebuilding a team and all that stuff is really difficult. Yeah, I mean, some of my background, obviously we do online lead generation today at Contractor Appointments, but like how I started in this industry was knocking doors, doing appointments for roofing companies, knocking doors, setting appointments, and got in the home improvement industry that way. And so I've got the experience knocking doors. Luckily, I don't personally do it anymore, but it's hard work. It's no joke to be able to do it, but there's nothing about taking control about getting leads in the door and having a mechanism where you can have a team that's just like can actually go and get your own leads versus have to get supply of leads anywhere else. I think that's a huge thing overall. And I can't remember, I think it was one of your posts or Tony Hoty's post was like, don't rely on online lead generators and your online marketing and all that kind of stuff. You have to have a portion of your business that is farming yourself. Like you have control over your input is getting an output. I thought that was
one of the things sorry. It's one of those things we tell people is Canvas can be very predictable as far as your lead generation, where those other sources, you can't always predict it. like a lot of companies have gotten away from that van model, right? Where you have 10 canvassers in a van. But I worked under that for a long time. And well, if I have 10 seats in the van and we average 2 leads per seat per night, that's, 20 leads per night. If it's that's 5 days a week, that's 100 leads per week. 50% typically in Canvas will run right off the bat. And if you know your closing rate and you know your average sale, you can kind of figure out what Canvas should be producing. That's one of the great things about Canvas, is that it can be very predictable as in comparison to those other sources.
Oh, totally. Because, from my own, obviously we know the online lead generation space, there's ups and downs. Like when the 2020 election happened and everyone out, like the elections and politics were advertising online like crazy, the cost of leads, the cost of marketing, like tripled overnight. Where if you're able to have, like a consistent thing, like with canvassing, that can maintain and consistently get you leads throughout the, it's like online's got so many fluctuations to it that can determine your lead cost or your cost of marketing and all that kind of stuff. A new player comes in town, you drop in lead volume. All those pieces can play into that versus you have more control over kind of a portion of canvassing. So I think that's a huge piece of it. So obviously if you're not sold on canvassing already, I think it should be part of everybody's marketing mix. I tell you, I can't tell you how many companies that are small who come to us thinking that online lead generation is like their ticket. They, the big companies use online lead generators, so I should do that. It's like, no, you shouldn't. That's not where you start. I would start in canvassing, build a team, get consistency, and use online, as a source. In the companies that we've brought on some pretty large franchises that started as a canvassing model and just implemented appointments in their locations and had tremendous success versus, other companies who are trying to build on online leads. It's a lot harder to do. It's not impossible, but I think that's where I would start if I was a smaller business today.
Another thing you can think about too, like we talked about it being predictable, but something else is when you're getting those online leads or even at a home show, you don't know where people are coming from, right? They might be outside your service area. It might be an area that maybe that area, the houses don't have a value where you would want to really send a lot of reps to. Canvas has a lot of precision to it, right? I'm going to send my teams to the areas that the sales manager is going to do well in, and we're not going to go into areas where maybe the home value is not good, or we're going to canvas around jobs that are going on where neighbors kind of maybe more inclined to have us come out while we're in the area, so there is a lot of precision to canvas if it's run well.
Yeah, I think the most interesting, I'm curious, you probably have a ton of these stories, but I think the most interesting canvassing program I saw was that a company went to the manufacturer and found out that there was a window that was built in like 30 years ago, the type of window in a specific geographic area was built by all these builders and that have been going bad. And then they just went to that neighborhood and are like, hey, we know people in this neighborhood have this window and were installed by the builder at this time. Are you experiencing these things? And they crushed it because they had something to talk about. And it was just an easy way in the door. And they made so many sales in those markets because they had very, very specific information from but yeah, it was a really interesting kind of strategy there too.
If you know a development is 10 years old and they put in builder grade vinyl windows 10 years ago, and you're in the Northeast where it gets cold and then it gets hot, those windows are probably having issues, you can target. I mean, even like roofing companies have been doing it forever, right? If there's a hailstorm or these guys become weather experts, they're plotting where the next hailstorm is going to be. I mean, Canvas is very strategic.
100%. Yeah, I love that. So I think we're answering the first question. I don't even have to ask it. It's just why should Canvas people use Canvas as a strategy? And obviously there's multiple. I think the precision piece of it is super important. You want to talk about the type of customer, your ideal customer, the type of home, the home value, the people who are most likely to be approved credit wise. That's one thing. When with online marketing, you have no control over that. From they can come in from anywhere in your market, versus you can go to specific neighborhoods where are going to have a better credit in that market also, and have a specific felt need there too. I think is huge. So I think the other question to start the questions here is just, what are the setup costs? Like, what should companies, if they either getting back into canvassing or starting canvassing for the first time, like what should they be prepared for to start a canvassing department? And from just a cost and even, and then we'll go all the way into like what their cost per demo really should be backing out to and expectations there.
Yeah, I really think the most important thing you need to do is hire a good leader, right? Canvas departments need leadership, right? And that leader has to be able to skill build and lead by example, build a team. And they also have to be able to recruit, right? They need to recruit their team. So right off the bat, you have to, we have at Tony Hoty, we have people that call us. It's happened many times. They said, we want you to help us hire canvassers. And it's kind of more like you need a manager that knows how to recruit. We'd rather hire a manager and train them on how to recruit, because canvassers do tend to be transient. You'll get more longevity out of that canvasser if you have a good leader and the canvasser is doing well financially and they create a good work culture for the canvasser. But the first thing is you're going to have to hire, a strong canvas manager. Now, people always ask how much do canvas managers make, right? I mean, on a low end, it could be a base salary of, and again, it depends on where your office is and what the incomes are, but maybe $40,000 to $50,000. But if you're going to hire an experienced canvas manager that has a lot of, experience working in the market, it's going to even be, higher than that, even just for a base salary. So somewhere in that area to make it attractive for them. And then from there, you have to hire canvassers. You have to build your team. There's going to be costs there. You have to decide, are they going to use their own cars? Are you going to have a company vehicle? Right. Then that takes into gas and upkeep on the vehicle. Uniforms are important. Vests. I mean, there is an investment when you start a canvas department.
Yeah.
Even thoughts about things like where are they going to meet? Do you have meeting space for them? Things like that become important. So there's definitely cost.
Yeah. Have you seen kind of a range of how much companies need to, be kind of in for that? They're like, hey, this is like, you're going to be in for $100,000 investment. Don't even try it if you're not going to, invest, at least, the next year and this much money into it. Or what kind of expectations?
Yeah, there's going to be monthly expense. So, I mean, if you're a small canvas department, maybe you're thinking somewhere in that, $10,000 a month, which is kind of low. When I ran large canvas teams, my budget was about $100,000 a month. So we're talking about $1.2 million. The important thing about that cost, and we mentioned the metrics and stuff, and why we say you need a strong leader is you can't just hire canvassers that don't produce, because this is when, right? This is when the costs start to go crazy. I'm carrying 10 canvassers and we're writing 4 leads a night, right? You're going to run into a deficit. Your cost of marketing. My goal was always 15% or less. I love 10% or less. So we look at what the department's going to lay out every month, but we also need to look at the return. Like for a lot of people, 100,000 might seem like a lot of money to lay out in a month, but if you're doing 800,000 or 900,000 in that month or $1 million, then things sound a little better.
100%. So out of curiosity, what's the average cost per kind of demo, issued appointment kind of are you seeing from canvassing? And let's just talk about the exteriors, kind of like roofing, siding, windows. Trades out there, and then we'll kind of get into if there's any other trades that make less sense for door knocking versus others.
I love door knocking for everything, but I mean, we tend to look at home improvements, but like, companies that do home security systems. I just talked to a company in Texas that sells water door to door.
Yeah.
I used to watch Abbott and Costello movies where they would sell vacuum cleaners like door to door, and they throw dirt on the floor, and then the vacuum wouldn't work or whatever. And the comedy movies, but door to door has been around for a long time. So I mean, it might be hard maybe it's harder to sell a car door to door because unless you're driving a car around with you. But for a lot of industries, I think they could be doing door to door. Real estate does door to door.
Yep. Yeah. So what is the kind of cost per demo or cost per issued lead that companies should be expecting from canvassing? You were kind of saying the marketing cost should be 15% or under, hopefully 10% or under on that side of things is what your expectations are. So pretty industry. It shouldn't be out of any means of like drastically less expensive than other means of marketing out there. That shouldn't be the expectation, but it sounds like, what the budget still needs to obviously be within that 15% marketing cost is, there too.
Right. That cost per lead issue really, in some ways, it does depend on your company and what the model is. Like, of course, we want as low as possible. I was just talking to someone that had, he had a $300 every time a salesperson walks out the door. That cost per lead issued was around $300. He wanted to bring it to $250. I mean, $250 is great, but there's also companies that sell very expensive products that I know of that are more in that, $400 to $500. Yeah, they're happy there, which to me seems really high. But, of course, for me, I like the lower cost per lead issued, and I think this. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if you can get it as slow as you possibly can, that's always ideal. But yeah, I totally hear you that every company is a little bit different. Their pricing, their profit margins. If you're going in high-end neighborhoods, you're going to sell $30,000 worth of windows. And your average ticket, man, you'll pay for $400 out the door all day long for that. Versus if you're in a small neighborhood, you're going to sell $12,000 worth of windows. That's a totally different process there. So. There's some relativity to that with this precise targeting method and probably even expectations for canvassers potentially there too.
What I would tell you on that is if you start a Canvas program, whatever your cost per lead issued is now, whatever that is, Canvas should typically come in lower than that. Like to me, I mean, one of the great things about Canvas too is a lot of times we're the first ones in, we're the only ones in. Right. It's not like where I laid out $10,000 for a home show and a meeting with 5 companies. Canvas should have a lower cost per lead issues, which is one of the benefits. That's what I would tell you is in your company, if whatever that is now, Canvas, to me, if Canvas is running properly, it's going to come in lower. It's going to lower that cost for the lead to go out.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of questions coming in here. We'll start diving into some of them here. So Haley was asking just with high turnover rate in canvassing in general, how do you navigate like permitting? So obviously some markets in some cities, they require a permit to solicit, but with high turnover, that can pose a problem. So how can you handle that? And I'd say even the turnover problem, how can you handle that? That's really the key there, right?
There's a couple of things that lead in. The first thing I'll tell you is there are companies that don't permit, and they almost think it's a freedom of speech issue that we can't knock on the door and ask about their windows or their roof. There are other companies that believe we should be permitted, and I'm kind of like I probably fall somewhere in the middle. Like I'm a little wishy-washy on this subject about permits because I get how frustrating it can be. Where it's like, we have a job going on, but I don't want to knock on the neighbors' doors because we don't have a permit. Have I ever sent people in to that neighbor? I have. The first thing I would say with the permitting issues is having a good work environment will hopefully help keep people on your staff longer. Having a good culture, making good hires, which can be difficult, for companies. Because think about this: a lot of Canvas departments, I'm a canvas. I was a department head, right? So I had 4 like van managers under me. So we promote canvassers typically into those manager positions, and managing is a different skill set than canvassing, right? So it's also like promoting your top sales rep into the sales manager position can be a disaster sometimes, because they may have an attitude like, just do it. I just did it. You just do it. Just easy for me, but 80% of your team, it's not. So the first thing is for me is training the managers on, being a good leader, making good hires. That'll help you keep people on your team longer when it comes to the permit process. The other thing I would say is sometimes it is just a pain in the neck. You hire someone, you like them, they apply for permits, and they quit. Unfortunately, it happens. And there's no way around. Some areas, if you get a canvas ticket, it's $50. Other areas, it's $500 or $1,000. Other areas don't care. The other side of it is we always want to have integrity and be above board. And if they absolutely require a permit for a certain area, you should get them, think about this. If you're a parent and you send your 19-year-old kid to canvas and he gets a $500 ticket and he has to go to court, you might not be happy that your kid is working for that company. That's why I say I'm a bit wishy-washy on the topic, but that's why. I know owners, there are owners that feel differently about the whole permit process. And it could be a pain in the neck. I mean, that's just being really honest.
Yeah. Oh, it definitely is. And I think that it's hard overall. There's different situations that maybe require different things, but I think the thing with turnover there too, I think maybe you can speak into this, is just like fixing that possibly with compensation of how you compensate them to keep them, valued, but also you're talking about from a cultural, like if you hire a good leader, they're going to hire, better cultural fit, and they're going to be able to hold the culture better, to hold on to people longer. So it's not going to be this transient, thing also. And I think the other piece of it is within that whole process is just making sure you're hiring the right person overall in their experience. Because I think too many times you hire, young kids who have no idea what they're getting themselves into. So they go knock on the first doors, or they start getting rejection, and they go, they split pretty darn quick. And you just invested in them in training and resources and hiring them and getting them shirts and all that kind of stuff. And they don't show up for work the next week. How do you, what do you recommend from like hiring someone with experience? Because it's one thing to tell someone they're going to be it's no different than call center. It's like, it's one thing to tell them that they're going to go knock on doors and it's going to be really hard and they're going to get rejection. Another thing to actually do it. How do you prevent that? Do you hire people with canvassing experience only, or kind of what do you find is the best there?
Both. But I mean, I would hire both. So sometimes there are some people I think you shouldn't hire someone with a ton of canvas experience just because they're going to have a lot of bad habits that you have to try to break. But I would hire both. Sometimes you have good canvassers that are just in a bad situation, that maybe they were at a place where there was a bad culture, or they didn't get paid, or something happened, or they wrote a lot of leads. Then see, think about a lead. The canvassers can write leads, but the leads have to get set. The leads have to get confirmed. The sales reps have to actually go to the house. There's more than just the canvasser as far as like the lifetime of that lead. And what happens to some canvassers is they get all excited. They write a bunch of leads in the beginning. And that first month, the 3 or 4 weeks, they're so excited, they're so pumped up, and then none of their leads run. And now they're not getting any bonus money. Their hours per demo isn't too good. And that enthusiasm suddenly just like, is gone. And they're looking for another job already. So one of the things I used to do is prepare my managers, and I would talk to people about the roadblocks, like, expect that in 3 weeks. You might love this person, but in 3 weeks, you might hit a roadblock if their leads aren't running, you really have to stay on top. First off, on the metrics, if somebody zeroes out, find out why. If they zero out 2 nights in a row, maybe now let's pull them back in for a little extra training. Or I want my manager or myself to walk with them and see what's going on. Right. Tony always kids about, we hate the manager tan, right? And the manager tan is when the canvas manager, he has a tan, but only on his left arm or her left arm, because it's outside the window while they're driving around looking at everybody, but they're not knocking on any doors. They're not, right. Yep. They're not working with people. So that's it. And the other thing, cultural stuff. I mean, you have to keep it fun. Canvas is a hard job, you know, and it'll play with your mind sometimes. So keeping it fun. Yep. We typically have hourly pay, right? But we always want to, while we have hourly pay, we're going to have bonuses, you know, but contests, you know, things like that. But when you're interviewing someone, even if they're hung up only on that like hourly pay or weekly pay, and they don't really care about the bonus, that would be a little bit, that would be not a little bit, that would be a problem to me in the interview. I want someone entrepreneurial that's interested in the bonus and how do I make bonus and how does that work? Yeah. And I've had some canvas managers tell me, oh, this guy's a pain because he asks me about every lead. I'm like, yeah, but that means he or she cares, right? If canvassers just set leads and never ask how they're doing, they don't care about the bonus. Yeah. I want somebody that's invested.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. I like, yeah. On that note, I think it's asked a couple of times here. Is just what's a healthy like compensation? How much should typical compensation structure should be for a canvasser?
I don't think you can do minimum wage. A lot of companies want to do minimum wage plus bonus, but I would typically go a little over minimum wage salary wise. I mean, I know companies that pay a weekly salary and the canvassers work full time and they get health insurance and things like that. There's also companies that do it more part time and they're paying hourly, and there's no, you know, because it's considered part time. There's not really insurance involved and stuff. So kind of depends. Like, are you going to do a weekly salary? You know, I know companies that do $1,000 a week for full time, which sounds like a lot, but I'm going to explain that in a minute. You might do $600 or $700 a week. Again, it depends on where your office is, but the higher salary you pay, and you should do this on any salary, you've got to hold them to their metrics. I can pay you as much as you want as long as you're bringing in what you're supposed to bring in. You know, like for a company that's paying someone to canvas, not to manage, to canvas like 40 or 50,000 base plus commission, that's great if I can afford it. But if they're not producing leads, they have to know that they've got to correct it quickly, or I can't carry them at that kind of a salary. Yeah. And that's where you need strong managers to keep them riding. You know, part-time, a lot of companies part-time, it's a few dollars more than minimum wage, plus a bonus on every demo. Maybe you're paying 25 or 50 on a demo, and maybe they're getting, you know, 1% on sales as long as they hit maybe 20,000 a month in sales as a minimum. Yep. I think it's good to hold them to hour per demo. Like if you want a bonus, maybe you have to be at 10 hours per demo or less. You know, if you're at 10 hours per demo or less, you know, then you're probably you're not costing the company money. You're making the company money.
Yep. Absolutely. So I'm curious, like, have you seen, like, talk about turnover? In my experience, like with canvassing, when you hire part-time people, like, is that going to be higher turnover? Because it's not enough money for them to sustain a role. It's a lot harder, and then they'll find some other part-time job to kind of fill it in, because if they're not making enough, or versus full-time.
Yeah, I mean, I've worked with companies. I worked with a lot of part-timers. When I had 50 canvassers, only a few of them were full-time. Most of them were part-time. Especially, I had an office in New York City, and New York City has a lot of rules as far as you know. Even if you're part-time, you still accumulate sick days and things like that in the New York City boroughs. We had a lot of rules there that were different than my Long Island office. But even now across the country, typically if you have part-timers that are working 20 hours a week and they're college students or something like that, that's fine. And they can generate a lot of leads. And I've had people like that, but they'll also leave and take another job kind of quickly. You know, they can, you know, something shiny comes along and they leave. You know, if someone's getting a healthy salary and they've got health insurance and things like that, then maybe they're going to be more experienced, more likely to stay. Yeah, but even those people can get frustrated too if you don't have a strong culture.
Well, I think that's the thing. It's just how do you deal with rejection? How do you deal with it's just again setting up this culture that this like the rejection is a part of the process, and that's just like it is all about culture and setting expectations, and then helping rebuild that morale. It's no different than the sales environment where you go strike out in a couple of days. Like what's the focus of today? How do we focus on today? How do we better ourselves and not just learn the thing one time? So. I
used to tell. Sorry, I was gonna say I used to tell canvassers focus on the doors and making a great pitch. That's your focus. The leads will come along if you do that.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious. So Phil asked what percentage of revenue should come from canvassing in a healthy organization in home improvements.
I mean, there are companies out there where the majority of their revenue comes from Canvas. I just work with a company that I did Canvas training for 25 sales reps because all those sales reps knock on doors. The majority of the leads come from Canvas. Starting Canvas can be kind of a culture shock to the company when it starts. I used to be anywhere from 25 to 40% of our calendar at times, it depends on the month sometimes too. Like December, I could be like more than 50% of the calendar because the other lead sources were shutting down,
Yeah.
But yeah, when you're starting out, it really depends on the size of the company and how many leads are going out. Can you get to 20% your first year? That'd be great.
Yeah.
That'd be a great goal.
Absolutely.
And you have to know that when you start with Canvas. I was going to say sales reps are used, if they're used to those traditional leads, right? They show up at the front door and the people are waiting for them and they're in a good mood. Canvas, there tends to be more objections at the front door. So that's one of those, Canvas leads tend to be a little squirrely. They move around. It's not that they're not going to run, but they don't run when they're originally supposed to. Right? They bounce around. So as your company gets better at handling the Canvas leads and selling the Canvas leads, more of those Canvas leads are going to start to stick to the calendar. But in the beginning, it's going to be a little bit of a culture shock to getting those leads sometimes to stick on the calendar.
Yep. Well, that's where I think the reason why you're knocking on the doors in the neighborhood and then your sales reps also following through on that reason and walking through it. It's if you just knocked on the door yesterday and you're like, hey, we're giving estimates on free window on Windows, would you like a free estimate? And they go, sure. Like it's different than someone calling in going, hey, I want an estimate on free Windows on, an estimate to get, a free estimate on replacing my Windows. There's an intent that they had to go physically do that versus you just knocked on the door, and your sales team does need to get over that hump and understand and learn that, like you said, it's a little bit of a culture shock to be able to do it and kind of fall into the rhythms there. So one question Larry had was
speaking of the calendar.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, just ending on the topic of the calendar. Here's one of the great things that Canvas does when it comes to your calendar. Friday afternoon, you're confirming all your Saturday leads, and you have a full day Saturday, or Thursday afternoon, you're confirming the weekend leads, and a few of them fall off. They don't confirm. They're not going to happen. One of the great things Canvas can do on a Friday afternoon is fill your Saturday morning. So when we talk about the calendar, it is so huge that Canvas can keep that calendar full when it looks like things are starting to fall apart. So I want Canvas to be as big a part of the calendar as possible. And when we talk about the calendar too, last thing I'll say on it is Canvas leads should run within 72 hours, right? The longer we put off a Canvas lead, the more likely it is not to run, right? It tends to be something where the longer it's like bread, the longer it stays out there, it gets stale, So if you're a company that doesn't have any availability, say for like the next week, you may have to start thinking about increasing the capacity on your calendar if you're going to bring in a Canvas team, because you're going to need more people to run the leads. If all the leads are getting set a week out and the canvassers can't get on, those leads are going to tend to fall off the calendar.
Yeah, 100%. So you have to make sure you're you're hiring at canvassers at the capacity, you have to fill calendar slots too. So there's coordination there. So Larry's asking just as a small business owner and like the ability to afford a canvassing and can't afford a canvassing department, any recommendations for him of just like hiring someone else to help with, with canvassing, to help him with sales, all that kind of stuff? I'm curious your thoughts on that.
Sure. Some companies have one canvasser, and you can do that. Tony has a great program. Tony Hoty has a great program called the Brand Ambassador Program, where it could be a department of one person, and the main thing that person's doing is generating leads. But they give out gift baskets to the to homeowners who just had work done. They ask for referrals, and then they knock on doors up and down the block around the job to generate leads. And then they'll go to another area, drop off another gift basket, knock on doors. So brand ambassador is one way you could do that. But you could also just hire someone to knock on doors. You don't need it. You don't need a full department. There are lots of companies that have one or two canvassers. Absolutely. Well, I think it's, if you don't have a big department, have one or two. Why not?
Yep. Oh, and even yourself, if you can knock on doors and follow the same strategies of going and knocking on doors around every project. I think every company should be doing that. If you're that small. So Anna's got a bunch of questions here for us, which are fantastic. She's asking, what's the best time to do canvassing? So I think that's a fantastic question.
Here's my lame answer. When people are home, that's the best time to canvass, right? So I used to canvass afternoons up until about 8 o'clock in New York because it's very expensive to live here. Everybody, a lot of people work 2 and 3 jobs to, if you want to buy a little house in Brooklyn now, it's about $1.5 million. I mean, it's gotten, but that's changed. Even in New York now, most people are canvassing during the day because people are working from home. People tend to be home a lot more during the day now than they used to be. Also, daylight. I believe in daylight. People are less apprehensive if we knock on their door in daylight. It gets a lot tougher in the winter when it gets dark at 4 or 5 o'clock. That just adds another, objection. Like, hey, it's late. It's not late. It's only 5 o'clock. It's dark. Yeah. That's the problem. So when people are home, daytime. Some canvas teams work Saturday and Sunday because people are home. Other departments don't want to run Sundays. But I believe Saturday's a good day to canvas because people tend to be home on the weekend. But I also know companies that are super successful that are basically Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. They have a morning meeting and then they go out.
That's
my lame answer. Daytime when people are home.
No, I think the advent of people working from home, myself included here, as I'm sitting in my home office, like this wasn't the case pre-COVID. People are working from home way more often, and I think that's an interesting change, that we've seen here too. People working from home, and I think that plays into the whole idea of doing full-time versus part-time. I mean, 8 hours in the field knocking doors all day long is hard. It would be really tough. But because of that, when I first started, it was 4 to 8 was the only time you should knock doors because that's the only time you're ever going to reach people. And I would argue that's probably not the case anymore and on weekends. But and that's a really interesting perspective there.
What's funny about it too, when I first started training for Tony Hoty, one of the first companies I worked for was in Florida, and it was in an area where there were just a ton of retired people. And I thought, wow, same thing, Sean. We canvassed, my team came in at 2. We had a meeting. They went to the field. They took their break up front, and they just canvassed nonstop, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. And then I went to Florida, and they were working 9 to 5. And what I realized was there were tons of retired people in the area. So 9 to 5 was great. Everybody was home. And now I'm finding across the country it's like that. People I don't really have contact issues during the day, no matter where I go.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, all the more shows that canvassing should be used even more today than even in years past. I also asked about neighborhoods that have HOAs in Florida. talking about Florida here, that don't allow canvassing. How do you solve it? I don't know if there's an answer to that, but
I'll tell you about Florida. Florida can be real tough. Some of them, if you're not supposed to canvass, don't, because I actually know of a guy in Florida who got got arrested for trespassing in an HOA in Florida for canvassing. So be very careful is what I would say. Maybe speak to the HOA. I know there are a lot of HOAs, and that's just one story. It doesn't mean it's going to happen, but I would say to be real careful if it's an HOA and they've told you not to solicit. Have I canvassed in HOAs where we're not supposed to solicit? I have. I've never been arrested, but I know of one story where that did happen, and it was in Florida. So I would say be careful with those HOAs.
Yep. No, absolutely.
I'm not telling you to break the law. Sean and I are not telling you to break the law.
No.
Right?
Follow the rules. Absolutely. Carly asked just what's a good demo to hours worked ratio? You mentioned that just briefly. If you mind just stating that again, that'd be awesome.
I think, and this could vary a little bit too, right? Like when I had my department, we were 15 hours per demo or less, but we only had basically one product. We were a Windows company, and we had a few doors, but basically we only had windows. But when I work for companies that have roofing, siding, windows, et cetera, 10 hours per demo or less, I think is becoming more industry standard now. 10 hours per demo or less, and you're profitable. 15 hours or less, my department was profitable, but again, we only had one product.
Well, I like working it out that way. I think that's a good method to be able to make sure like what's profitable. How do you kind of measure everything down? But just like you said, if there's more products, there's more opportunity for them to get in the door with a homeowner finding one of those. So I think that's awesome. So Anna asked all about managing the database. So a database of canvassing, is there a canvassing group, what the canvassing group generated? Do you call them again? Do you knock on their door again? All that kind of stuff. Any recommendations for like canvassing apps? I know there's a bunch of them out there today. I'm curious if you have any recommendations there.
Yeah, I don't really have a recommendation of any one company. Like you said, there's a lot of companies that are out there that have canvassing software. Some companies have even created their own software. I would say with that, most companies you can just Google canvassing software. Most of them will give you a free trial. See what you like, what works. Some systems might work better than others than what you have in your call center. Tony and I, like, we haven't really talked about pitching and stuff, but when it comes to calling them back, like some companies still do a phone transfer right at the door where they get the homeowner on the phone, with the call center, and we can still train to that, but our program typically we're not doing that. We're sending the lead into the call center. We tell the homeowner, our office is going to call you in about 5 or 10 minutes. Please answer the phone if you see a number that you don't recognize, because if you don't answer the phone, they're going to send me back here to knock on the door again. I don't want to take up any more of your time than I have to. So it's kind of like a threat. Like if you don't answer the phone, we're coming right back. So you could feasibly come back in 5 minutes, to the door. If you're a solo canvasser and you're driving to areas, you probably can go back to houses a lot easier than if you're running a team of 10 people and you're going to different areas. You can't go back for one person to one area. That's always the beauty of the brand ambassador program. They could say, okay, you want to speak to your spouse, they'll be here Thursday at 4. Okay, I'll come back Thursday at 4. You can't do that with a team of 10, but with a team of 1, you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think but if you're going to get a larger team, I mean, using one of those apps they're super powerful. I mean, it's pretty crazy. I used pencil and paper to manage what house numbers you went to and when you're coming back to, and you go back through that neighborhood twice to make the most out of it. And these apps are just amazing for tracking who said no and not to go back and knock on the door and, deal with rejection that you didn't need to deal with. Because
that's why I'm not really mentioning I'm not mentioning a specific app because there's a bunch of them, and if I mention one or two, then people are going to get angry that I didn't mention them. I'm just telling you, if you Google it, it's on the internet. You'll find something to try.
Yeah, there's a bunch of really good ones out there. So and some of them integrate with CRMs and all that kind of stuff. They're absolutely fantastic.
And when we talk about those metrics, those are so important. Like, the different metrics that these apps can track. But yeah, an old mentor of mine used to always say the metrics don't lie, right? Yeah. Ultimately, there may be one or two things, maybe they make a little adjustment or, but for the most part, the metrics don't lie. So tracking is super important, especially in Canvas, because if you don't track and if you don't know where you're at, and suddenly you can see expenses blowing out of control. So
I think the canvassing programs out there, I mean, they're like linked to a phone or an iPad. I mean, everyone's got a phone on them. There's just an app on your phone, and it's like GPS tracked. There's all sorts of stuff that are just crazy that allow you to be so much more, specific and targeted to make sure you're making the most of your canvassers' effort too.
If I can give one word of caution with the apps and canvassers, make sure the app is good with a bad cell phone. Canvassers tend to have bad cell phones, and sometimes apps, they're great on iPads or expensive phones, but the phones, sometimes the part-time canvases have, and not so great. And you could run into some. It's not so much the app as it is the cheap phone trying to connect with the app. So that's something to be cautious of. Look for reviews on that.
Yep. No, that's a great point. We got a bunch more questions. We'll kind of fire them out here because I want to be respectful of your time here too. But Kyla asked, just how do you feel about having a brand ambassador and a canvassing team, or that you keep them separate, or are they the same kind of thing? Is what she's asking.
Yeah. Great. I love canvassing, brand ambassador, home shows, events, non-traditional marketing. Have a brand ambassador, have a canvas team. I love it. Have both. Why not?
Yeah, absolutely. So Larry's asking, just as far as just like the approach, let's talk just like getting in the door, like how to say, like, get yourself, even that approach to knocking on the door. What do you say? Do you leave a door hanger? How should you knock on the door? What questions should you kind of use to get them to engage? What best practices you have? We could have a whole nother webinar on that topic, but I'd love to hear your high level.
So one of the things when I go out into the field and I work with teams, I tend, like the first day or two, like I'm actually knocking on the doors, right? I'll have people shadow me, and I'll actually hit the doors today, because a lot of people are a little skeptical at first with our approach. I think is a little different, and a lot of companies, when they knock on a door, they just immediately go into like a sales pitch, and we don't, we knock on the door. We do a friendly knock, right? We don't want to make it sound like the police are coming to break the front door down. It's a friendly knock. Take a few steps back, so I'm not right on top of the door, as they open the front door. I'm dressed professionally. We advocate vests, nice clothes. We don't want people expressing themselves when they're out representing the company. They're out there representing the company. And when they come to the door, we typically open with like a general announcement to the neighborhood. Like, look, I don't know if you noticed our trucks in the area. We're doing some work for Mrs. Jones. Hopefully we haven't been disturbing you. They say they haven't. We tell them we've had some people come down to the job sites, just wondering, what projects you may have coming up. We show clients, we have like a laminate where it's got pictures of products the company has. If they pick something, we go right into questions like, well, why'd you pick the windows? What's going on with your windows? We start to pull information. I haven't even said my name yet. I haven't said who I'm from, because that's all trite in the beginning, right? Totally. We're just we're going to open up with a conversation. I'm going to try to find out that there's some need first, right? Find out what's going on with their property. And then at that point, I'm going to transfer into a value of the visit. But we don't really go into even who we are or Can we set you up for an appointment, until we've actually had a conversation with the person and we found out that there's an issue, right? We always say no need, no lead, right? We don't want to send sales reps out on nebulous leads that aren't going to run. But that's really what it is. And even going a little further, we don't really believe in like objection handling. We think it's a conversation, right? The more questions people answer, the more likely we are to generate a lead, So even if they're not interested, I have a few questions that I'm going to ask them. Like, let me ask you something. Is this something you're ever going to do? I'll say, well, yeah, eventually we're going to do the roof. Well, what kind of time frame did you have in mind? I don't know, maybe later this year, right? Well, great. That's why I'm here. Yeah, and maybe from there maybe your company has a 1 year price quote or something like that. A lot of companies have gotten away from that, but that third question is going to be like, have you gotten any quotes? And they'll typically say no. Well, great. That's why I'm here. And we kind of go into that value, but it's just getting a conversation going,
Well, it doesn't have to be super complex, which I love, but I love how you open that whole thing with, is it just curious? Have you thought about doing any home improvements to your house? And you're just having these open-ended conversations that starts a relational conversation. I've had about 10 door knockers to our house, talking about roofers in a neighborhood, but they always start off the same. Hey, we're doing a neighbors. My name is so-and-so, and pretty aggressive on that side of things, just versus like stepping back and like leading with curiosity, can build a better relationship in those markets.
It's also canvassing with confidence, right? Just like they say, sales reps get commission breath, where it seems like all they care about is getting a commission. They're desperate to get a sale. Canvases are like that too. If they reek of desperation, the homeowner feels that desperation. So I remember the first time I canvassed with Tony Hoty. We knocked on a door, and I was shadowing Tony years ago, and they had this cool car on the driveway, and he knocked on the door and he asked them something about the car. And Tony and this guy had like a 5-minute conversation about the car. And all of a sudden the guy was like, wait, why are you here? Like he forgot, like that he was just so into this. And they had such a rapport when he went into the pitch that it was, guys like, yeah, you can come look at my windows. It was unbelievable. But once we open with who we are and the company, we feel that's a little salesy,
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's fantastic recommendation there. So, Rebecca asked, do you recommend any recommendations in starting a canvassing team with existing sales reps, or do you recommend hiring like for that role specifically to get things off the ground?
You could do both, to get things off the ground. Like I've had a few companies that had, I just worked with a company. They had a sales rep. He didn't have a lot of experience in sales. He was a younger person, and he was doing okay in sales, but not great. And he was getting frustrated. And they said, look, we're thinking about starting a canvas department. Would you be interested in doing that? And he became a great canvasser. And someday he'll probably go back into sales, Yep. So on something like that, it's good, but they have to not see it as a demotion, right? They have to not see it as a negative. But if you have salespeople like that, if you like them and you want them to stay with the company, that could be an option. Because I always say canvassers are like sales reps in training, right? My biggest legacy on Long Island is that I have canvassers that are still working in the sales department where I left, that are like 6-figure type producers, and they started out as entry-level canvassers. So you can hire from outside, but if you have someone inside that might like it, why not? As long as they're positive about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think being a part of roofing companies and seeing roofing companies where their sales reps are also canvassers, that can be a hard transition. Like for them to do both the canvassing and then, well, I'm here to sell the job, like in retail, like that can be harder for sales reps to kind of put on both hats simultaneously. I've kind of seen, but yeah, I know it definitely is doable.
I've seen some companies where the sales reps, like I just worked with one in the Northeast, a company, and the sales reps now they went from getting all their leads given to them to they had to self-generate like a portion of their leads. So I was in front of a group of 25 or so sales reps that had to now door knock. And let's just say they weren't overly thrilled, some of them, but it became fun. It became a thing. They were meeting in groups. They were like, hey, I got my ladder out on the truck. We can hop right up on. And all of a sudden, when they started getting leads that sold, guess what happened? Not all of them, but a bunch of them really got into it and started to self-generate.
Yeah.
But it was a matter of getting them out there and getting them to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
No, that sounds good. So I think the last question we'll kind of take today here is just Philip was asking just like, how should you prepare your sales team to approach canvassing leads differently than kind of the normal like inbound leads that you're getting right now?
Yeah. The thing I would tell a sales manager is if you want perfection, you're not going to get it in canvas leads, right? We want them to run 80 to 90%. 90% of the time is great. 80% of the time, you're going to get some one parties, right? You're going to get some not homes, even if the lead's been scrubbed by the call center, just like any other lead. But, your sales rep should expect that they're going to get more objections up front and less at the end. And I've heard that from a million different sales managers. That the biggest adjustment for the sales team was, you're the salesperson, you show up on a lead where they called us. It's a direct mail lead, right? The front door is open. They've got soft music on. They've got coffee and cookies ready, or whatever, and they're waiting for you. A canvas lead has been confirmed, the night before by the call center. You show up at 10 o'clock and they go, oh, was that today? It's, it just happens on canvas leads, right? They tend to be impulsive canvas leads sometimes too, but that's it. Like they set an appointment today and then the next day they spend $20,000 on a product without doing any research, right? They tend to be impulsive buyers sometimes, but you have to get through that initial barrage of like, hey, just so you know, I'm not buying anything today, right? Yep. Then they see the product and now they got to have it. Now they want it because they tend to go that way.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I think that's, it's just kind of a thing to kind of get over. They don't know who you are, what you're doing, or why you have to start everything from scratch, on the front end of that phone call versus, they might have known about you from an ad, or there's referral or recommendation or something there too. So that's fantastic. But thank you so much for just spending your time with us today. I feel so honored for you to be able to take that time with us. How can people reach out to you or get to, reach out to you, answer questions or ask questions, anything to you directly?
I want to say just thanks for having me. It's always a good experience doing these events with you. I enjoy it. And you're right. Canvas could be like multi-hour conversation. There's so much that goes into Canvas. I have a page on tonyhoty.com. My email address is Chris at tonyhoty.com. So feel free to reach out to me. If I'm happy to see Canvas is making a big comeback because I love it. I could talk about it all day.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I so appreciate it. I mean, there's just words of wisdom after wisdom shared here today. So thank you for diving into it and going deep here with us today. So once again, everyone, thanks for joining us here today, and I hope you all have a fantastic rest of the week here. Thank you all for joining us here today.